was formed 20 years ago in response to a human trafficking case in Berkeley involving an Indian business owner named Reddy. Anybody here remember that case? Okay. So if you'll recall, in the wake of that human trafficking case and the death of one young woman, there were three things that happened. One, the police criminalized the survivors. White feminists in the area saw this as an Indian problem and this backward culture that's bad to their women. And South Asians, many Indians in Silicon Valley defended Reddy because he was such a philanthropic, popular person in the community. And what was missing from all of this was a transnational South Asian feminist voice. So as Narika and Maitri organized to support the survivors, ASATA formed to provide this voice, to reframe the issue from one of scandal and immigration fraud to one of labor exploitation and gender-based violence. Since then, we have been this kind of nebulous network of all volunteers who have mobilized in times of crisis. So when 9/11 happened and the special registration and Sears program went into effect that George W. Bush instated, ASATA members lined up with the men who had been called to the Department of Justice to register and took down their contact information, did Know Your Rights trainings, and made sure that if they went into the DOJ office and didn't come back, their families were notified. We also were part of anti-war organizing and anti-war protests across the Bay Area. And in the context of that, had to really crystallize a political frame of being an anti-imperialist organization. We were not just a group of shared identity that cared about racial profiling. We saw ourselves in direct connection with anti-imperialist struggle globally. And honestly, we did lose some members during that decision. There were people who didn't like racial profiling, but they were for the bombing of Afghanistan. And we said, well, this isn't the organization for you then. So we have to be able to be clear about where we're drawing our lines when we're doing organizing work. We've since joined political formations with Chinese for Affirmative Action, taking us on as our fiscal sponsor and connecting us to a broader API political space. Becoming members of South Asian Americans Leading Together, the National South Asian Network, and going to their national conferences and confronting people like members of the Hindu American Foundation and bringing a really radical voice to those larger South Asian spaces. And also being members of Third World Resistance, which is a political formation based in Oakland that is made up of a number of different groups, including the Center for Political Education, Arab Resource and Organizing Center doing Palestinian rights work, Critical Resistance doing prison abolition work, the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, Viet Unity working the Vietnamese community, Haiti Action Committee, and a number of others. And through that connection with these many numerous groups that are all representing different communities but have a shared purpose of bringing an internationalist perspective to local struggles of social justice, we have been able to fight and win together. For example, when the first Muslim ban was announced and people were being detained at the San Francisco airport, members of Third World Resistance and ASATA came to provide leadership at the action of the San Francisco airport and made sure that we were carrying this, this banner of no ban, no wall, sanctuary for all. So the Muslim ban was wrong. If you're going to be against the Muslim ban, you have to also be against the militarization of the southern border. And we're talking about immigrants and sanctuary for all people. And we held that space for a good 3.5 days, waiting for either lawyers to be let in or the detainees to be released. And every one of those detainees was released. And this mobilization at the San Francisco airport, it also happened at JFK, it happened at other airports across the country. And because of this rapid physical response and disruption, the Trump administration relented on the issue of green cards. So while we did ultimately lose the Supreme Court as far as this idea of the Muslim ban being upheld, it would have affected so many more people, green card holders included, if we had not mobilized in that moment and mobilized in this way that brought so many communities together and cut across so many different spaces. Another win to point out is that in Alameda County, folks have been fighting against this program called Urban Shield for many years. This is a program that involves the training of our local police officers by international oppressive militaries, including the Israeli Defense Force, and using military-grade weapons and training our cops to see black and brown bodies as criminal. So when you hear in the news about unarmed black people being shot by the cops, stories like Oscar Grant or Mario Woods, who was pumped through 20 bullets, it's because our police are trained to do this. So how do we disrupt that, and how do we tie together the relationships between what's happening in occupied lands across the world and the way that the military and the police operate in our own communities? And through relentless opposition and using both direct action protests to shut down the trainings from even happening, blockading the gates to the Urban Shield training grounds, and packing city council meetings to get our local officials to cut funding and cut relationships to this program. They finally, when was it, Rachel? Last year? Last year, this program is no longer happening in Alameda County. So this is what can happen when we actually get together to see how our struggles are all intersecting. Part of our work with Third World Resistance has allowed ASATA members to really investigate issues of things like the model minority status and embrace the concept of a model minority mutiny. And for someone like myself who grew up in Silicon Valley as the Indian girl in class, we are so often seen as you Asians, you South Asians, you're doctors and engineers, you're good at math, and you were given a sense of privilege because that means that we're then somehow better than other minorities, which implicates us in white supremacy. So how do we deal with unlearning that internalized, that toxic element that we've internalized? How do we build and learn about how Zionism operates and how similar that is to how Hindutva operates, and how all of that is part of these same systems of white supremacy? This has allowed us to show up in direct actions and mobilizations grounded in a deeper sense of political understanding. So one of the actions that we participate in every year is Reclaim MLK Day. So Martin Luther King, as you all know, his image has been very sanitized in the United States to one of just being about peace and nonviolence. And his story has been intentionally stripped of his socialist and anti-imperialist rhetoric. So reclaiming his radical legacy is part of a mobilization in Oakland every year that Third World Resistance helps to lead. We also show up for May Day, International Workers' Day, to support all workers' struggle and ground that in an understanding of immigration and supporting undocumented immigrants. And every year on International Working Women's Day in March, ASATA, along with Gabriela USA, Filipina women's rights organization, hold down a celebration. And just recently, since the election of Donald Trump, there's been these massive women's marches that happened in January. And this is an exciting moment to see so many women politicized and outraged to show up in the streets. But again, an internationalist perspective is very much lacking. So ASATA and Gabriela always bring a contingent to the Women's March, and we're able to speak at the main stage of the first Women's March in Oakland. to elevate this issue of what women's rights actually means. Women's rights is immigrant rights. Women's rights are all of these things. We also, just this past year, brought effigies of Modi, Duterte, and Trump and burned them in a trash can, because this kind of macho fascism is something that many of our communities are understanding. So to conclude, I wanted to highlight some of the challenges that we're facing as activists. One of our responsibilities is based in the Bay is to understand how much money from Silicon Valley theses goes to fund the BJP. So how can we really truly disrupt that? And working with the Tech Workers Coalition and others are kind of pathways into that disruption. Knowing that many theses here in the Bay see themselves as progressives, but still support Modi. And you can't be a progressive here and support fascism in your homeland. So these are questions of how we are reframing dominant narratives and creating invitations in for folks to build with us. And now, ASATA is 20 years old, looking to the future. We need to be able to unpack how violence happens within our own communities, caste-based violence, gender-based violence, homophobia and heterosexism, patriarchy, the oppression of queer people. How do we look at that and unpack that with each other and heal, while we are also uniting broadly against these external attacks and this onslaught under these oppressive regimes that we are now currently dealing with? Part of that involves building up our leadership, making sure that our leadership are made up of women and Dalit voices, and deepening our shared study, which is a big reason why so many ASATA members are here today to meet with all of you in the South Bay, so that we are understanding and sharing resources so that we ground ourselves in that political education, see how our struggles are intersecting, and can be truly strategic as we're continuing to fight for collective liberation. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, she has given too much of information, and really it's a great experience to go through all these things. So basically, when you are opposing somebody, we don't know whether we will be successful or not, but when we get some success on our way, then it gives us courage and hope. So that is what Sabiha and her team in ASATA has seen in SFO. Really, I think. And she very nicely connected the social issues of local people experience from the third world countries. So recently, I stopped using the word third world so consciously, because the third world is a term given by the imperialist in the Bratton Institute, that they call the developing countries the third world countries. Then Che Guevara, when he spoke in the UN, called we are tricontinental. So what they mention as the third world is a world from Asia, Africa, and South America. So why then you don't call it a tricontinent? And another interesting fact about MLK, that they try to sanctify him, they try to show the people as a harmless guy, that go for protest when JFK offered some concession and you withdraw. And that is how they are trying to convince us and trying to show that MLK is a harmful figure. The same thing they are doing for Ambedkar. That when Ambedkar told in the Constitutional Assembly that the system that you are laboriously built up is rejecting the economic freedom of the people, those who are suffering from that will overthrow. But that Ambedkar, the ruling class definitely is not, will show, but also people like us also is not ready to listen. And this happens for every revolutionary. So I would like to quote from Lenin again, from State and Revolution. The chapter 1, he opens like this. What is happening now to Marx theory has, in the course of history, happened to repeatedly to the theories of revolutionary thinkers and leaders of the oppressed classes fighting for emancipation. So where Ambedkar, King and all will fall here with Marx. During the lifetime of great revolutionaries, the oppressing classes constantly haunted them, received their theories with the most savage malice. the most furious, hated, and most unscrupulous campaign of lies and slander. After their death, attempts are made to convert them into harmless icons, to canonize them, so to say, and to hallow their names to a certain extent for the consolation of the oppressed classes, and with the object of duping the later, means duping the oppressed classes, while at the same time robing the revolutionary theory of its substance, blunting its revolutionary edge and vulgarizing it. Today, the bourgeois opportunities within the labor movement concur in this doctoring the Marxism. They omit, obscure, and distort the revolutionary side of the theory, its revolutionary soul. They push to foreground and extol what is seems as unacceptable to bourgeois. All the social chauvinists are now Marxist. Lenin writes, don't laugh. So this is what happened to every revolutionary. So when during their lifetime, the bourgeois will haunt them, but after that they try to show him as a harmless one. So now